Good evening. Welcome back to the Ball Order podcast. So we're really delighted to bring you a special today where we're previewing the Manchester United versus Arsenal game tomorrow. Hi, Arvind. How are you doing? Obviously, busy week.
Oh yeah,
Been a
busy
while.
week, very busy week. I think both of us literally dropped the ball on having the latest episode up there. So for those who are like eagerly waiting our latest opinions, I'm sorry about that. But yeah, it's been a busy week. What about you, Anand? How have things been?
Yeah, finally the part-time consultancy caught up a bit and
Yeah.
ended up being very, very, very full-time. So apologies to everyone. But yeah, what did you think? What do you think of United last week?
Honestly, probably one of the best weeks of Ole's managerial career, right? Like you have to be honest. I was buzzing to be honest with the result midweek. Final against one of the hottest young coaches and probably best tactical teams and well-coached teams in the whole of Europe. So
Hmm.
in my eyes, that was actually much more impressive than the result away to PSG. Um, don't want to obviously get carried away, but I think we've advocated the diamond before on the show, and I think that it was
Yeah,
very clear that it really plays to the strengths of having top quality midfield creators and an extremely, you know, Marcus Rashford can't really do much wrong right now. So I think he had a pretty special night.
yeah.
Obviously, that the one thing I do want to say is I don't think that system works against a smaller team. So that question mark in
Hmm.
my eyes still remains against Solskjaer. Like, can he still have a system that works against the Burnleys of the world, the teams that sit back, and or the Arsenals of the world? And maybe we talk about that,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
it's going to be
yeah.
interesting to see how the weekend looks like. So, but
Gosh, I thought
overall,
you'd wait a
buzzing.
little bit longer before throwing a bit of shade at us. But yeah, there you go. I guess. I mean, before we talk about Leipzig, I mean, Leipzig was. I mean, banter aside, yeah, damn good performance. I think. Yes, it was slightly inflated by the late goals, but it was a solid performance. It never looked like you were really in danger of losing that game. Maybe 30 minutes in the first half where Leipzig were in it. Apart from that, I can't really think of much. But yeah, before that, last week, obviously, Chelsea. Um, we're not getting that hour and a half or 2 hours of our life back. But
Yeah,
I mean, I
that
guess in some ways, the reason I wanted to bring that one up was so far, obviously, PSG, you mentioned, Leipzig, you mentioned, great performances in both. I can't really say much about that. But the Premier League has been slightly different, hasn't it, so far? Weirdly. So, how do you think that 0-0 impacts your preparations?
so I actually don't think it's weirdly. In fact, we spoke about this where we basically said that you can see United doing much better in Europe simply
Mm,
because there are teams out there in Europe, especially in that group, that would expect to come at United and effectively play into United's strengths, which is
yeah,
staying compact, being deadly in transition, having extremely pacey forwards who can like stretch play. And I think all of that came into play. Yeah, those are like 90 minutes that I'm
yeah,
not getting back. It was like worse than watching paint dry. It wasn't a great game, and like obviously fair like enough memes from like Solskjaer's like smiling face at the end of it. But I think it was actually encapsulated that these two teams are still very early on in their cycle of being rebuilt,
yeah,
right? And I think that game really showed that from both a tactical perspective as well as an adventure perspective, right? Like both coaches, they wouldn't say it out loud, but were pretty happy going back with a point each, and they both will feel that they had points to prove, right? I
yeah,
think that Lampard probably would be slightly happier and should be. He was technically away, though I don't know if that matters for much anymore. But he had to prove that he can actually organize a defense, and I think that they did
yeah,
a decent job there. And I think with Ole, like obviously we had a shocking home record until that point of time in terms of like goals conceded,
yeah,
inflated by 2 games. So I think for him, he would still probably take that. In general, I think this is going to be a pattern for the season, though. I think we'll do better in Europe than in the league. And that game wasn't a great advert for the Premier League and quite out of place in terms of the madness that we've seen in terms of attacking quality and defensive
yeah.
frailty in the league until this point of time. But yeah, as a United fan, that was painful. I don't think it would have been much better for you as an Arsenal fan looking from the outside in.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I mean, I always want to watch all these big games, but I know we say some games just don't live up to the hype, but like this took it to another level. It really did not live up to the hype.
Yeah.
I was expecting, to be honest, I was expecting a high-scoring game. I was expecting that, especially Werner, Pulisic coming back. I was thinking, don't play Maguire and Lindelof. They're going to get absolutely split open by these two. Didn't really happen. Not sure exactly what it was. Maybe, and we may well have discussed this on one of the earlier episodes, but I still think Werner down the middle in the Premier League may not actually work as well as people think. He's really, really good coming in off the left, picking up those half spaces. And I felt like even though Maguire and Lindelof didn't have the pace, somehow they just always seemed to have him covered, which they didn't really give him that much space, and he didn't really seem to know where to go. So, yeah, it didn't really go the way I thought. I expected a lot of goals, and we got none. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was actually expecting, it's easy, obviously, benefit of hindsight, but like they kind of canceled out each other. I think that's kind of what happened. Right. Both of them set up with three at the back. You always had a spare man. When by definition, three at the back means those half spaces are harder to find, simply because that's where you would operate as a third center back by default. But I do agree with your thesis that Werner's probably better in drifting, in from the left. The challenge there is just the fact that they probably have Pulisic, who I actually think is the better long-term option out on the left.
Agreed.
So, lots of riches, actually, I think. Lampard really, I think the onus is on him to find out something that works. There's a world in which Havertz plays as a false nine, effectively to create some additional space, right? So that you can have multiple people who can jump. He can kind of drop deep and get more people to make those runs. But overall, not great. And the Premier League are going to be frustrating days ahead for like United fans. I know we're all on the top of the moon with the result against Leipzig, but it's not going to be smooth sailing, and there's going to be growing pains. But what about Arsenal? How was the last 2 weeks?
It's been similar in some ways, in the sense the Premier League results have been quite poor, really, as in not particularly inspiring. Two games in a row, 2 losses in a row in the Premier League now. Leicester was a weird game. So for those who didn't watch the game, this is the first time Arsenal have switched formation actually for a while. So back when we lost to Man City in June, the first game after lockdown, was probably the last game the game after that against Brighton as well. We played a back four, but since then, most of the games have been this kind of fluid back four, back five hybrid formation. And it's yielded good results. But it was clear that we weren't going to get creativity from that. So Thomas Partey was signed in the summer, and this was the first game against Leicester that we actually played a 4-3-3. And I must say, for the first half in particular, I was very, very happy to see a 4-3-3, first of all. I mean, it completely changed the way we were really on the front foot, able to control the midfield, win all the second balls coming back, even when we were playing it long to the forwards. And it just seemed to work really well. And the other thing that it was quite good at doing was ensuring that we weren't being caught out on the break at the same time. There was always a spare man, whether it was a fullback tucking in, whether it was Xhaka kind of sticking, just covering the wing when Tierney was going forward. Like there was a lot of good stuff there, really. The only thing that there wasn't was any sort of decent finishing. I don't know what's happened to Lacazette, really. I honestly didn't know. Was I watching Lacazette, or was this actually Darren Bent playing up there? And yes, he should have possibly had that first goal. I'm still struggling to see how Schmeichel's view was impeded by Xhaka, given Xhaka was behind him. But VAR is VAR. You can't really complain about that. There were chances in that first half. We should have really gone into the interval 2-0 up, probably a different game. But the second half was slightly worrying in the sense it was just so flat that we absolutely dominated them first half. came out second half and it was just really slow, really flat. Don't know whether it's an issue with fitness still. Don't know whether it's players getting used to the formation, whatever it was. Yeah, hope we don't see any of that tomorrow. Just to put, I mean, if we want to put stats on it, first half Arsenal had 11 shots, I think 4 or 5 on target. Leicester had 1 shot. Second half, Leicester have had 5 shots, of which 2 or 3 are on target. Arsenal had one shot on target in the second half and 1 shot total, which is just not good enough. Just should not have been happening.
Yeah.
And if you give Vardy a chance, he will score, and that's exactly what happened. And I just knew as soon as he scored that there's going to be all sorts of Vardy is having a party memes with Thomas in there. I just knew it was going to happen as well. So not a good game. Not a good game.
Yeah. And there's a bit of a sliding door moment as well, right? With the fact
Yeah.
that Arsenal tried to get Vardy, and I think it's hard to say he's not made the right decision, to be honest, right? Just looking at the outside in to stay back with Leicester, but just taking a step back, right? Obviously that was the result, but the one thing that stood out to me is Arteta till now has had a bit of a honeymoon period, right? And I think that there's not been so much of a spotlight. I think there's been a fair amount of like positive press. And he's shown some interesting ideas, right, and implemented them. And I think he's been lauded rightly for being a pragmatic coach. But I think there's now questions on like, can he really organize a team that can play in the front foot? Because I think all of Arsenal's best results, right, and I'm not going to put the 3-0 against Fulham, who look dire in general. Right.
For sure.
In there have come from kind of doing what Ole has been criticized for, which is sitting and hitting on the break and on the transition.
I think Sheffield United as well. Sheffield United as well. They definitely played on the front foot. And yeah, I'd say I would agree with you. I'd say particularly in the cups, the best results have all come from probably a kind of back 5 formation, breaking quickly. And yeah, I definitely agree with that assessment. And I think the big issue with the team that he's had to pick has actually been the lack of a creative midfielder, which means that he just thinks, well, even if we do get the ball up there and I commit men forward, we're not going to pick the final ball, and then we're going to be vulnerable on the break. And so he set up the team in a certain way. Now that he's got Thomas Partey in there, who is not creative, but will get up and down the pitch a lot quicker, he's just got to be that little bit braver. That's for sure. I'm not one of the fans who literally lets him get away with absolutely anything. If Arteta gets something, well, I don't want to say wrong. If he makes some questionable decisions, which you will do at some stage. I mean, at the end of the day, he's been a coach for about 10 minutes, right? So he will make some questionable decisions. He hasn't had the full transfer window that he wanted. I think not getting Aouar was always going to be a bit of a blow, but yeah, he has to be questioned for certain things. I think the lack of ambition in the second half, especially when you've got, especially now that you've got Partey in there, you should be braver to push that extra man from midfield forward.
Not enough runners. I think that's the problem. I think that's what actually I quite liked about like Willock's performance. Right. He brings something that nobody really does in that Arsenal midfield, which is like, it's very functional right now. It's very good at keeping the shape and making sure you don't get hurt in transition, but like that's not what you expect when you think of an Arsenal midfield. At least a post Wenger Arsenal midfield.
No, absolutely. And I mean, this is the thing that people took for granted. And as much as we can criticize Arteta for it, I still think we've got to criticize Mr. Good Evening himself for the way he's let some of the players leave. I mean, Santi leaving was, I think, possibly before his time. That was, you never knew if he was going to come back from that injury. Fine, whatever. What he did with Ozil, which has clearly led to whatever problems there are now, that's been a problem. And letting Ramsey leave was, without replacing him properly, really, was a big problem. So, yeah, he's inherited a lot of these issues. Yes, there are some players there who could possibly fill a void. So, it's interesting you mentioned Willock actually. Did you watch the game against Dundalk then?
To be honest,
Or
only the
watch any of it?
highlights.
Okay.
I'm not. I've subjected
Yeah.
myself to enough Thursday night games over the past few years that I want to
Yeah,
avoid
yeah.
watching them when I can.
I mean, unfortunately, I still end up watching these games. I mean, if Arsenal are on, I always say, yeah, I don't really care about this game. But the truth is, if the game's on, I'll watch it. Yeah, I mean, Willock's an interesting one that you mentioned. He's one guy I think I've talked to you about quite a bit in the past before he put in some distinctly average performances just because I'd bigged him up to you. But
Yeah.
yeah, he's one of the guys. Yeah, 100%. He's one of those guys. He'll make the run forward, but he'll still track back. He'll still work hard. So for me, he's a perfect Arteta player actually, and he is one I'd like to see a lot more, particularly off the bench. One thing that I like with Willock is that he will always look to drive forward. He will always look to pass forward. He will always look to get the ball and run forward, which I think is a bit lacking. One of the players I want to see that a little bit more from as well is Dani Ceballos, because the guy's got bags of talent. He is just so good technically, but for some reason at the moment he's just always picking the ball up in midfield and pirouetting around and then passing it sideways or backwards. And I just feel, come on, I know you can play that pass through the lines. We just know you can do it. Just do it. Like,
It,
and it's frustrating, actually.
we'll get to the preview of the game actually tomorrow,
Yeah.
and I think as part of that, I actually was going to pick out Ceballos, spoiler alert, as kind of the
Yeah.
player to watch because he kind of reminds me of Ander Herrera, and what you mentioned is interesting because he reminds me of a Jose Mourinho era Ander Herrera, who was much more of a traditional six, cut down
Yeah.
his attacking instincts, his running from midfield, and stayed further back, but always brought the goods in the big games.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you basically need is the Louis van Gaal era and Herrera, who was much more of a rounded eight, getting himself forward. And I think
That's right.
he's really the player I think about when I think about Ceballos. And I think that the skills there, he's very good at positioning. Talking about positioning, I think I need to adjust my webcam positioning a bit. But in general, yeah, he's a player that I would really look out for tomorrow. But yeah, seems like I think question marks for Arteta. It'd be interesting to see how he responds. Whether he responds by actually actively taking on his critics and being on the front foot for the game against United, or it's going to be more the same. And it's I think a large part of the game is probably going to be driven by which United and which Arsenal turn up, because I can see
100%.
us canceling each other, and it's interesting because I think there's almost it's a very much a scenario analysis that needs to happen, right? But before we go there, just kind of taking a step back, I thought what would be interesting as hardcore Arsenal and United fans is talk about this fixture, and I would go as far as saying it's the defining fixture of the first decade of the Premier League. Is that's a fair statement?
Yeah, I'd definitely say so. Particularly, I think since Wenger joined the Premier League. I mean, Ferguson was obviously already there. Obviously, there's a bit of bias, but I don't think they make rivalries like this anymore, particularly the Wenger-Ferguson era. I mean, this is probably one of the few fixtures in the Premier League era where both teams have both been up there and genuinely hated each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's where this is a proper rivalry. So, yeah, I mean, it'll be good to revisit some of those games, actually. So what we're going to do here, we haven't actually discussed this at all. So we may end up picking some of the same games, but Arvind and I actually have 3 fixtures we've picked out that stick in the memory, and we'd like to talk about. There may be recency bias here, well, in one of my fixtures for sure. But why don't you start? I mean, why don't you kick us off with your number 3, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the 3 that at least I was thinking about was kind of one game that encapsulates the rivalry for me as a United fan. One game which I would say was kind of the best performance that I've seen from a United team against Arsenal, and one game was
spoiler
kind of
alert.
just the
I think
most.
I might aid to hear that, right?
It's actually not the game. That's a surprising thing. And the last one was kind of the highest quality of attacking play, or just like the most outrageously entertaining game of the list. It might turn up there. We'll find out. but I thought I'll start with I'll start with number 1, which is kind of the game for me that encapsulated the rivalry. And I think For me, really two games that stand out, right? One game which honestly I was just too young to watch, but I watched enough reruns of it. And another game that I did catch, and it was one of the first games actually I've ever watched of football. I think the first one was the last ever FA Cup final replay. I think just watching that game again, it it to me it kind of told me the margins between the team was so small, and I think that
Mhm.
it kind of harks back to the fact that that was a season in which United won the treble,
Yeah, I was going to
right?
say, yeah, fine
And people
margins.
forget this. People forget this, right? And actually, that's why I hold that United team in such high regard. Apart from like the quality of opposition we faced in Europe, just in that group and through the different stages, but we won that title on the last day. We were trailing and actually not winning the title for the first half until Andy Cole scores, right? And well,
Hmm.
Beckham equalizes, Cole scores the winner against Tottenham, in fact, and we won it by a point, if I remember.
Yeah, it
And
was. Yeah, it
and
was a point.
and
Yeah.
and that Arsenal team, if you had put them in any other league, probably in Europe at that point in time, they would have likely won the league. They were just against like probably a
Yeah.
truly all-time great United team, but it was probably also an all-time great Arsenal team, right? The year
I, I,
before.
I agree with that. I actually think this is the thing. They obviously didn't win anything that year, so people would not necessarily put them up there. But that's possibly the best Arsenal team in the Premier League era. That particular year, it's very possible actually.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So that's the game that I would say I would really choose. Like just the kind of you could smell the dislike from the screen. Truly like men against men. Like tackles were hard. People got up, got in their faces, right? Like it wasn't
yeah,
anyone crying to the referee. It was just like people willing to leave everything out there to win. And obviously the Giggs goal for me was quite a special moment. The other kind of game I would say for me an honorable mention was the 4-2 at Highbury,
mhm,
which was just an incredibly high quality game. I quite like that just because of the Vieira Keane face off
yeah,
on the tunnel, which I really feel
for
does
sure.
encapsulate the rivalry. If there's two players that really encapsulate the rivalry for me, it's Vieira and Keane.
Yeah.
So that's the game I would go for, like the first one, but the second one was like very, very close from my side. What about you, Anand?
Hmm. So the first one I'm going to start with is actually the 2002 title-winning game. So it's one which I remember fondly because, correct me if I'm wrong, but that might well be the last time we won at Old Trafford,
Ooh,
despite it being 2002 in the Premier League. That is.
yeah, I'm
Um,
trying to think back, and I actually don't think so because I remember in
yeah,
2006 you did beat us, but as a last-minute goal by Henri. I think
yeah.
it was
Or
the
is
very
that the last?
first year
Yeah,
at the Emirates, right?
yeah,
So yeah, that might be the last time
yeah,
at Old Trafford. Maybe there's other ones that I've just blocked
yeah,
out
yeah.
for me.
I might
But
well
yeah.
have missed them out, but I mean, it has actually been so long since we actually won at Old Trafford. Hopefully tomorrow, but who knows? But yeah, the reason I remember this game really well actually is because, well, I was still in school, and it was one of those which I remember watching. I'd been an Arsenal fan for about 3-4 years, genuinely concerned. I think we were missing a bunch of players, um, and the first few minutes it was a relentless assault on the team. Like
Mhm.
you guys came out absolutely blazing, and it took a Will Tord goal to, of all people, and I still remember the commentary when he scored. So it's one of those moments that stays in the memory. And I think as an Arsenal fan, I guess despite the kind of title drought we've had for such a long time, one thing we've been very lucky with is winning titles at rival grounds, and winning the title at Old Trafford. I mean,
Yep.
it's the best thing that could have happened in that era. 2002 Wenger Ferguson rivalry. I mean, you couldn't have written a better script, basically. So yeah, I'd say that's my number one actually. What about your number two then? Yeah.
Yeah. So number two, I would say kind of best performance. Um, it's got to be the 3-1. Actually, there are two 3-1 games I was thinking about. One in the Champions League semi-final, and the other one was the season later, where like probably my favorite United counter-attack with Nani and Rooney. And it was really close between the two, but I'd have to go for the first one just because I that was actually a very good Arsenal team, right? I think that people forget that right now just because they just didn't add that last player or two.
Yeah.
Very good Arsenal team. We were defending European champions. We'd absolutely battered you at Old Trafford, and it was still 1-0. I remember like Almunia and Kieran Gibbs, if I'm not wrong, just
Yeah,
had like the
yeah.
games of their life. And it was exactly those two who were shown up the next game. And that's actually it sounds weird to say this, but for a team that's really been associated as a champion club, we've actually not had too many times in our history where we've been the kind of indisputed best team in the world.
Mhm.
Um, like I think we've hit a very consistently high height, but there's rarely been times in which like you've looked at like this Barcelona team or even the AC Milan team of the mid 2000s and said that's the best club team in the world, no
Mm.
questions asked. The last time I think we were closest to that was that game, right? It was truly an extraordinary performance. There's one big blot on it, which I think told for us in the final against Barcelona, which was Fletcher's like red card, which still hurts me till
Yeah.
today. It's like probably, there's probably three red cards that hurt me in my life. One is that, and all three of them come in the Champions League. That's the joke, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't care about the red card that Johnny Evans got when he lost 6-1 to City because, like, let's face it, Man City don't matter as a club. Like those results, like it really doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
Joke of a club. But really thinking about like the Champions League results, that one, it's the Nani sending off, I think against Madrid, and the Rafael sending off against Bayern Munich. All three, which even today it's like just hurts me physically when I think back to that.
Yeah.
But overall, in terms of the quality of the play and how, I think that was a quite extraordinary United team. So that's probably like number two in terms of like the overall best performance I've seen against Arsenal.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So I've got a bit of recency bias in my best performance game, which is
The one you
actually
went up 3-0 in like the
that's the
first
one.
15 minutes. Is that
That's
the
a
one?
great guess. That is a great
Yeah, yeah.
guess.
We got
So
wrecked that game. I remember
yeah,
that. Like Sanchez was like looking like Messi regen. Funny how it
yeah,
turns out, but anyways.
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, 2015, Louis van Gaal. Um, I remember this again because, as I've said to you a few times, a lot of my friends are Arsenal fans. The amount of banter that I was getting. I think we started that season very poorly as well. That might well have been the. I think we may have lost our first two games as well, something along those lines. And United came in fairly confident, and the first 20 minutes of that game might
Massive.
well have been the best 20 minutes of football I've ever seen Arsenal play in the modern, as in the kind of since the golden well, I'd say the Emirates era actually. In the Emirates era, that's probably the best 20 minutes I've ever seen. They were just unplayable. I remember Özil that day. The goal he scored, um, I think Walcott assist actually for it, and just the way he just passed it into the net. Sanchez, the flick, the third goal, rocket into the top corner.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
that.
it was just something else. So yeah, that's actually the one I'm going to go for.
I think I almost guessed that, right? I remember that
Yeah.
game and it was over in the first 20 minutes. So I think
Yeah.
that's a very, very fair guess. So number three, like highest quality of attacking play. And maybe this time you can go first and then I can come after that. I've got two games in mind. But yeah, I would love to hear from you first.
This is a tough one actually. I was actually I was actually thinking about that 4-2 Highbury game, which I mean, despite the fact the result may not, yeah, I mean the result has gone the way it has, but like I think that's the one I would have actually picked. A lot of the things you said about it early on ring true. That's the one I would go for actually.
Yeah, so the two for me, obviously, like I hate to bring it up, but that game, the A2 game, the quality of the
Yeah,
goals were like ridiculous.
yeah,
I
even
like, but
bloody Welbeck and Ashley Young and stuff were
yeah,
scoring all
exactly.
these.
Like,
Yeah.
but it was a very people forget that, and
Mm,
it was probably like a bit of the turning moment for me at the way I saw Arsenal as a club, and I don't mean that in like a patronizing way, but I actually felt sorry for Wenger. I don't think I've
mm,
ever felt sorry for Wenger before that day, and I genuinely felt like a man of footballing principles, hung out to dry, working his way through like pretty terrible like financial constraints. And I remember you went and bought like a bunch of junk the day
Yeah,
after as well, like
yeah,
Jorginho and like Yossi Benayoun on loan or something ridiculous like that. I don't
yeah, yeah,
remember,
yeah.
but that Park from Monaco. But that was like an understrength team with like most of their stars injured. Van Persie was truly extraordinary that game. People forget that. Like
Yeah.
Arsenal could have scored more than the 2 goals. De Gea saves a penalty. He
It's a
also
good
makes
point,
two
actually. Yeah,
very good saves actually apart
yeah,
from that, which people forget because you remember the mistake he made
yeah.
for that Walcott goal that he let through his.
Mm.
But the one I'm going to go for is actually a game that we lost, but was probably the most entertaining United Arsenal game. It was the 2-1 in the 2008-2009 season where Nasri scores a double. Um,
Yes, yeah, yeah,
and Rafael scores a last minute screamer. I think it was its like second game in the Premier League or something.
yeah,
The
yeah,
reason I
yeah,
remember this game is the quality of attacking football was just extraordinary. Like each team could have scored like 10 goals basically that
yeah.
day. I remember Ronaldo missing some absolute sitters that game. And
Hmm.
I was just thinking to myself, you know what? This is, yeah, sure, this was not a great result,
Yeah,
but that game for some reason like just stands out. And I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Nasri since that game. Like I remember, when he left, I really wanted to bring him to United so that we could have Nani on one wing and Nasri on the other with Rooney
yeah,
up top. Didn't end up happening. He went to City and he ended up helping, yeah, giving us a helping leg
yeah.
with that last minute free kick by Van Persie. But
Mm.
yeah, that's the game I go for. I have pretty, maybe my memory's playing tricks, but I remember that being like an extraordinarily good game of
No,
attacking
no, it
football.
was, it was. I mean, after you mentioned it, actually, it's one of those games that I have kind of forgotten. One because obviously it's 12 years ago now, basically. But the other thing is that was one Arsenal team. The 2008-2009 Arsenal team was actually one of the most fun Arsenal teams to watch. We played incredible football that year, but the one thing that was super painful was 1-0, despite doing all of that, which is why the 2008-2009 season, I guess, is a bit of a blot. But I think that's a great shout, actually, for
Yeah,
a
I,
really
I remember
entertaining
that
game.
game because that was the period I really watched football quite religiously, I would say, those
Yeah,
4 or 5 years, like every single game, all the major teams, and even the kind of Arsenal kit, funnily enough, is like imprinted in my head. It's like those like white stripes that were running
yeah,
down running down the side. I remember that because Arsenal actually looked like they were going to run away with the title for the first half of the
exactly,
season
exactly.
until that game against, if I remember, at Birmingham City, where Eduardo breaks his
Yeah,
and like has that absolute horror injury,
yeah,
concede in the last minute. I think it's like 2-2, and then Gallus goes and cries like a little girl in the middle of
yeah.
the pitch. It's just like you just knew as
It
soon as
just
that
fell
happened
apart.
that this team just doesn't have any leaders. If your
Yeah,
captain is doing that in public, like where have all the men? Like I no
yeah, yeah, yeah.
offense, but
100%.
this is what you'd see in like youth football, right? Like
Exactly,
whether
exactly.
being the male or the female game, it's just what you see in youth
And
football where
there's a
like somebody
reason why the
takes a tantrum and
2008-2009 season is not remembered fondly by
ex-
Arsenal fans for that.
so yeah, that's the game I was going to go for, even though it was actually a game that we lost.
Right. Yeah. No, that's. I think that's super interesting. Probably a few surprises in there as well, which is always good.
Yeah.
So let's get down to tomorrow.
Before you get on to tomorrow, would love to hear from some of the folks of like,
Yeah,
what's the games that you would choose, right? Like, are there games
that's
that
good.
stand
Yeah.
out to you? Like this list doesn't make sense. Some recency bias maybe, but also we know we come from our places and experiences as fans. So would love to hear from you guys on like any other games that stand out to you on this rivalry. But yeah, that's enough of maybe looking backwards and let's look forwards, right?
Yeah.
Something that maybe Arsenal need to do more of tomorrow. Just
Yeah.
throwing the
Yeah.
shade there
Yeah.
again. So preview of the game. So would love to like get a sense like from the two of us, like, what are we really looking for out for the game tomorrow, right? It's
Mhm.
it's a pretty big game quite earlier on the season. Would love to talk about where the game might be won or lost, maybe a player that we really want to look out for from both our side as well
Yeah.
as the opposition, and maybe end with a combined 11.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I can go first on this. So I think it has a draw written all over it. As much as I feel like both sides need a win, and both sides do really need a win. We've seen Everton, Leicester, and today, at the time of recording, we've already seen City winning, we've seen Liverpool winning, we've seen Chelsea winning. Both sides really need a win. something tells me that neither will be particularly unhappy with the draw again, even though United drew the last game as well. So what do I think? I think that we're still going to be quite pragmatic. I think we're going to come in, possibly actually switch back to the back five, back four hybrid for this one.
3-4-3, I guess.
I do think it's very possible, particularly because of the injuries in defence. As much as we malign David Luiz, he's been a massive leader at the back there in a relatively inexperienced back line. I mean, Bellerin's obviously been there for a while, but it's a relatively inexperienced back line, and God knows who's going to play in defence tomorrow. So I have a feeling he'll go for a bit more cover there. Gabriel's been absolutely sensational this season so far, and I hope he continues that, but he's still a young man. I'm not sure Saliba's ready to play yet. Obviously, he had some personal issues, which I'm not sure if they've covered up. So it could be anyone, really. So I reckon as a result, he's going to go a bit extra pragmatic, put in an extra central defender in there. And yeah, it could actually end up being, as you were saying earlier, actually, it could end up just being a straight 3-4-3 even. So yeah, I feel like without Martial there, as much as Rashford's been in hot form, somehow I feel if we play a back three or back five, it's going to end up being another one of those games where it's a bit potentially for a bit attack v defense, but ends up just being two sides cancelling each other out. I still think Ole will be wary of the threat we have on the break. Oba's obviously rapid, potentially Pepe off either off the bench or even starting. Willian as well. There are options there. Obviously, there's always a threat. So I reckon Ole's going to think this along the same lines, and I think this is what's going to mean it has a draw written all over it. So bit of a 1-1 type game for me in my head. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, it's hard for me to disagree with that. But the one thing I for me is the big miss is Alex Telles, right? He's out with COVID. Because I think this would have been a great game to basically have him and play Cavani up top and
That's true, actually,
really have like a great aerial threat. So I'm actually quite disappointed with that, and obviously wishing him like a pretty speedy recovery there. But that probably means that we likely will play a back four, and I think that actually has implications for the game. Because the two formations we play with the back four, we really don't ever play a 4-3-3. And going off that, it's either a 4-2-3-1 or like the diamond that you saw.
Yeah.
And honestly, like in this game, like I actually don't think the diamond might be as useful to play, just simply because I think Arsenal are going to sit back. I agree with you. I think it's going to be quite conservative, and I feel like the diamond does much better when you can kind of you have the
when
space.
You can be a bit more expansive as well.
Exactly. You can, exactly. When you have the space that you can actually attack, because effectively the formation kind of like, you sit back and expand outwards. That's really how it's structured and designed.
Yeah.
So the question is then, if he plays a 4-2-3-1, there's for me, this game goes only one of two ways. Either, like I agree with you, pretty dour, like draw with, or like Arsenal are a bit more adventurous, and I can see us actually blowing you away if that's the case, right? That's the weird thing. It's one of those games where I either feel it's going to be like a very scrappy draw, or like even somebody nicking it, or it's going to be a blowout. And I actually think United can do that, right? I think like that's so there's so much that's dependent on the way in which the teams are set up.
There's the ambition as well. It's the ambition they show as well.
It's really the ambition,
absolutely.
But it's another game in which I think Fred is going to be absolutely critical, right? Just breaking up play and like denying Arsenal space in the transition, because that's really how you plan to play. And it's a game in which I would really like to see Van de Beek. I would actually, over-index on not having even like somebody like James in the squad, ideally. I feel like this is a game in which you want to put all your ball players out there, because space is going to be at a premium, and anyone who's good in tight spaces is likely going to decide the game, right? That's where like, I think Rashford's obviously made like massive. He's come on leaps and bounds since like even last season. I think he's looking like a very different level of threat right now. But where Martial is still, I would say, a superior player versus Rashford is like receiving the ball with his back to goal
Exactly.
and playing in tight spaces. And I think that's where we're really missing
Yeah.
Martial here. I would be much more confident going to this game if we had Martial in the 11, but that's
Yeah.
sadly not going to be the case.
No, that's. I think that's fair. So with Rashford, this is the one thing. When he's got space, we know how devastating he can be when he's got space to run into. And Leipzig just kept offering him that space. I'd like to think that Arteta will not do the same thing. I mean, just because I do remember at the Emirates, actually, when we beat you guys at the start of the year, we didn't take a super pragmatic approach. It was just very controlled. But one thing that we always did was make sure that David Luiz and Socrates, who were the centre backs on that day, were always tight against either Martial or Rashford, whoever was in the centre, and they just made sure that they didn't have space to run into. So even if we decide to somehow be a bit more adventurous, I feel like he will know. Arteta will know, and he will not leave that space in behind for Rashford. So yeah, I mean, let's see. It'll be really interesting. So I mean, if you were picking the team, then what would you go tomorrow for Man United?
I actually would probably, I would love to go for a 4-3-3, but I just don't think that, I don't think we've played that enough,
Mm.
right? And so I don't think we will. But I would like, this was one of the few games I might actually go for a 4-2-3-1, assuming that Arsenal will play a 3-4-3 that's relatively conservative, right?
Mm.
Have two sitters to, guard against the transition. I think this is actually a game in which like somebody like Matic having his control actually might be quite useful.
Mm.
I think Fred, in all of these big games, the energy, the tenacity he brings is just invaluable. It's a game in which I'd actually start Van de Beek out on the right, with the license
Interesting.
to effectively make runs into the box from that side. I think that'll be actually quite interesting. And he's actually very, very, like his work rate is off the charts. It's actually quite underappreciated and a function of the entire Ajax team that got to the
Yeah.
semifinals, right? Like that's why I also rate Ziyech. He's a fantastic presser, for example,
Yeah.
apart from being great on the ball. And I think it's important because I think if Tierney plays, and I think he will,
Mm.
I think it's quite important that we lock that down. And I feel like having Van de Beek there was a very good like progressive presser and can make those runs in and like play the interplay at the edge of the box is quite important.
Yeah.
This might actually be a game in which I do like a narrow 4-2-3-1, having Pogba out on the left. I might play the three attacking midfielders actually. Pogba out on
Okay.
the left,
Interesting.
which he actually did pretty well in Paris. Bruno in center, and having a Van de
Van de
Beek on the
Beek on the
right.
right. Yeah. 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 Okay.
Yeah, simply because I actually don't think we'll get much dice out wide if you're going to play a 3-4-3. So I actually feel there's not much value in trying to do that. We'll have to play in the half spaces. So why not just overload the half spaces,
Yeah.
right? And try to have, and since both of your wing backs are going to be Shaw on the left hand side and AWB on the right hand side, both of whom are defensively very sound, I'd push them up and try to make sure they win their one-on-one battle. So quite an
Yeah.
unorthodox formation, and I'll play like kind of Rashford as a 9.5 or whatever you want to call it,
Mm.
right up top, and have Cavani as a plan B later on, moving Rashford out to the left and having him go up top instead, based on how that's going. But
Yeah.
I think this is a game where the onus is really on United to create, being at home. And I think that having a bunch of players who are very good in like tight spaces is probably valuable. And I actually feel it can exploit the fact that there are like those downsides of the 3-4-3, right? Which is you
Yeah.
don't actually have as much cover in those half spaces sometimes. And
Yeah.
I
For
feel
sure.
like having that interplay at the edge of the box might be valuable. So very, very left field, I know.
Yeah.
Right. But that's probably I would go. It's effectively still, for a lot of purpose, it's still some form of a diamond.
Yeah. No, I was
That
going to
that
say it's basically a diamond, but with the 2 8s pushed further up, basically.
Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
diamond with the 2 8s pushed further up. So
Yeah.
it's actually very similar to the Christmas tree formation that
Mm.
the famous Ancelotti Milan side played, right? The 4-3-2-1. And even there, they played that often with a false, like a 9.5 in Shevchenko, who's a fantastic player, but actually was not an out-and-out striker. So
Yeah.
that's probably what I would go for. Somebody like Fernandez playing kind of the Kaka role, and you have Donny van de Beek playing the Rui Costa role, or vice versa. So throwback for those mid 2000 lovers of football.
Yeah. So I mean, if I was to guess, first of all, sometimes it's really hard to guess what Arteta is going to go for. But I reckon, as I said, it would be a 3-4-3. Obviously, Leno in goal. I reckon we'd see Gabriel in the middle of the back three. He's been fantastic so far. Has to play this game. On the left, I reckon he'll go for Tierney to allow him to kind of switch into that back four when we have the ball. On the right-hand side, literally anyone who's won the prize from a cereal box this week could play. But I reckon it'll be Mustafi.
Well,
Given,
that's what you reckon Arteta is going to play. So, like, I
yeah,
reckon Solskjaer will play something quite different from what I said.
yeah.
So, I think would love to also hear like what you would
Oh,
like to
what
see
would I
him
play?
play.
I would play a 4-3-3. Actually, I would say. I think as yeah, as controversial as this might be, I think you're to be got at actually quite a bit. Especially, I think your particularly your left hand side in terms of defense. If Solskjaer plays the team I think he is going to pick, where potentially he plays Cavani or Greenwood up top and plays Rashford out on the left, which I wouldn't be surprised if he did. Um, Rashford doesn't always track back that well, and Luke Shaw I think can be got at. So this would be a game where I'd almost switch around and try and overload the right-hand side. All our attacks have been off the left in the games we've played, where we kind of go Tierney, Saka, Ober down that way. I'd almost try and
You've got the
overload the
best probably one-on-one defender in the world in
yeah. So I
AWB,
wouldn't
at
go
least when
that
it comes
side
to tackling. So
exactly.
I don't. It's going to be an interesting battle. Obviously, I
Yeah,
really want to see Auba versus AWB.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
But this is why I would actually go down the other side, down your left-hand side. In which case, I still, I mean, because I was at the Emirates for that game, I still remember Pepe absolutely terrorizing Luke Shaw, and I remember even
yeah.
Lacazette absolutely terrorizing Maguire in that game. So what I'd quite like us to do actually is to play a 4-3-3, um, have tell Ceballos, I mean, get Bellerin, Ceballos, and I would play Pepe in this game 100% on that right hand side and really get them to put pressure on Shaw and Maguire. And I would actually try and get Ober coming in from making that diagonal run, taking him away from AWB as a result, and really pulling him close to Lindelof. And I'd really want us to exploit that. And that's what I would play, actually. Um, whether he's brave enough to do it away from home, I do think he would have done it at home, but I'm not sure if he's brave enough to do it away from home. In the midfield, I'd want to see a bit of a tweak as well. I'd want to see Xhaka at the base rather than Partey at the base. Main reason for this actually is because Partey's got the pace to get up and down. And I felt that he was being a little bit wasted in the middle of the park, where in some ways he was also getting crowded out. Some of the, when I say middle of the park, I mean right in the center, where he was almost having to drop deep here and there. And he was getting a bit crowded out. Not necessarily his fault, but the other, because of that, most players weren't brave enough to pass it to him, even though I'm sure he can, with his ball retention, he would have done okay. So I want to see him move over to the left of the back, of the middle three. Xhaka at the base, Sebas on the right, Partey on the left, get up and down, create the overloads on the right-hand side, put pressure on Shaw and Maguire, and then make Ober make that run into the center. I think that's something that we would have joy with. And I think having Partey there up and down to win that second ball when it comes back out, put it back in. I think that's what I would do.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you mentioned that because I think Ole might do, right, is I think it's obviously going to be a 4-2-3-1 or a diamond, like I mentioned. I can see him like trying to play both Cavani and Rashford up top, and Rashford effectively playing as, you know, a kind of a drifting
Yeah,
forward,
bit of a
and
Griezmann at Atletico or something.
Exactly. Very, very similar to that, right? Like a bit of a drifting forward.
Mm.
And I think that's actually a part of his game that's a bit underrated. He's a very good passer. He's got very good vision, and I think that's something I can definitely see him going for. I think there's also a game in which, um, like, I think he should be starting Van de Beek. I think this is exactly the
Yeah,
kind of game in which Van de Beek would really, really shine, right? The game in which somebody has, the ability to be brave enough to accept the ball in pretty tight spaces and
yeah,
still retain it, right? So I think it's an interesting game. This is probably one of the hardest ones to call, simply because there's, I think, so much dependent on the formations that they're going to
yeah.
play. So I'm actually quite excited to see what exactly the teams are going to be. It's just really, I would love not to see James. Is how I'd put it.
I would love
Nothing
to see
against the
James in
lad.
this
And
game.
he's just he just doesn't seem to fit into what we're looking to do to a large
Mhm.
extent, right? Unless we want to use him purely as a pressing trigger. But even there, I feel like Van de Beek is a better presser and much more intelligent in terms of cutting out the passing lanes.
Yeah.
So where do you think the game's like, what's the defining battle for you? Like for me, I think I've already said it. I think it's going to be Auba versus Van Bissaka, and that's just going to be like fun to watch as well.
Yeah, I think mine's actually in the middle of the park, and it's interesting you mentioned Fred. I think Fred. Yeah, I do agree. I think Fred will play. Um, I actually want to see that battle, kind of Partey versus Fred, actually in the middle of there. I think they'll both be combative. They'll both be doing a similar job, actually, trying to win the ball up. Win the ball back as high up as possible, and then play a pass through the lines to release a runner. So I think a lot of this could actually end up being won or lost there. I mean, I remember you actually put a tweet out last week. I think I believe it was you anyway. You put out a lot of tweets, which I hope the viewers enjoyed. You mentioned that Fred versus Kante was a very defining battle in that first half, and I actually see something very similar happening here. And whoever wins that battle could actually end up winning the game for their side. I mean, I do think both will play. So that's my pick. It's very easy to say Oba Wan-Bissaka. It's an easy one to say because it was probably characterized a bit last year as well. I think, but this one I think is going to be slightly different. I do think it's going to be a bit more of a battle in the middle of the park. Um, so yeah, that's what I'm going for.
Okay, so we've spoken a fair amount. What's a kind of combined Arsenal United 11? This is going to be fun. I think the first thing we need to actually align on is probably the formation, because I think that actually has implications in the kind of team that we pick. That's one way to go. The other way to go is like say there are some certs or non-negotiables in the team in terms of
Yeah.
players, and then try to pick a formation that makes sense for those players.
Should we
What are you
also
leaning
do this
towards?
based on who is available for this game, just to make it a little bit easier? Well, first of all, who's available, and do it on form as well. Actually, we should do it on this.
I think we should do it on form. Maybe I'll leave the availability out if that's okay. Just because I feel,
Mhm.
um, well, just thinking about the folks that would get left out. I guess it's Martial,
Yeah.
probably gets left out there.
Well,
Um,
Tellers will. I'm not sure he
yeah,
makes this anyway, but
I don't think he makes it
yeah,
yet. At least there's
yeah,
just so much left to
not done yet.
prove there. But yeah, I
Okay,
think
yeah, let's go. Yeah, let's go on that. I think that makes sense.
maybe I'll start with like the players I think should be there from both the sides, right? I
Yeah,
think for Arsenal, two like stand out to me, and I think the obvious ones, right? It's Alba and Partey. So I
yeah.
think they definitely make the team. I think on the United side, I think Van Bissaka for me is like a cert. I don't
Hmm.
think there's any questions about that. Um, I think Fernandez is probably
Yeah,
a
I'd
cert,
probably say Fernandez
and
is
and probably Rashford. So those are the three that I would say are like certs.
interesting.
Kind
Okay.
of crazy that I'm leaving out Pogba. I know you really rate Pogba, and I probably think like Pogba
On
makes
form,
it.
I
Like
would
in
agree
fact,
with you. Actually, on form,
yeah.
he's not been anywhere near that kind of level this year.
Though I would argue that probably one of his most accomplished performances came midweek. So, but it's just not enough
Yeah,
data points to say
we've
that.
got to do Premier League as well. That's the
Exactly.
other
But if
issue.
you're going to do a 4-3-3, for example, like
Yeah,
it's hard to argue against like a midfield three of like basically Bruno, Pogba, and Partey. Like that's a very, very solid midfield three to build a team around. But the only difference is you'll have to play. I still think that's a bit. It's got a soft center there, right? Because you just don't have like a true DM that can play there, which is a challenge. But like I was actually a pretty big advocate of bringing Partey, and I think he would do very very good, very well in like the systems that we try to play. But yeah, so those were the kind of 5 players that I think were like search. I don't think any disagreement from on those.
There's not much disagreement. I think it makes sense. I think with the midfield 3, that'll be the third spot will be the only one that we would probably argue about at this stage. So, yeah, I mean, goalkeeper. I mean, he might have had tough times, David De Gea, but I'd say on form, Leno's been a bit shaky actually this year, which has been a bit slightly worrying, especially now that Martinez has been sold. So I'm not going to fight that one.
And De Gea has actually looked back to his best. I know he's been doing a lot of like work in the off season. I think there's been a fair number of reports about that, and you see that even in like there's actually some interesting things which I've seen with De Gea, which is like his distribution's gotten better, and his assertiveness on corners has gotten much better, which actually was always a bit of a weak point for him, right? In terms of like how willing was he to come and claim, and I think that's got better as well. So for me, I would say I would have not said this even as recently as 2 months ago. But I would say it's De Gea, and so I'm guessing we're going for
4-3-3. I think. Yeah.
I think 4-3-3 probably makes sense. I would say the right back is. I think the central defense is kind of like the question mark. Honestly, like I don't really think there's like.
Well, I think there's a standout. I think there's no question that Gabriel makes that central defense because. He has been, I mean, off all of the central defenders that we could discuss, he hasn't put a foot wrong. And it's as simple as that. Everyone else has had at least one terrible game that's available. So it's more whether he's that good or not. He's just, I mean, it's a bit of a shoo-in really on the left of the centre-backs.
Yeah.
The other one's a bit of a free-for-all.
It's honestly a free-for-all, right? Like, honestly, I think that it's hard, right? Like I've said this before. I generally believe the most talented center back in terms of ceiling that's there at either club is Eric Bailly. He's made of glass. He can't stay fit. It's just hard to put somebody like that in. Tuanzebe is a serious talent. I think we spoke about that earlier than this. Like I mentioned that he had it's easy to forget him, but he's always been super highly rated, and he had a fantastic time at Aston Villa. And the championship is very unforgiving for young central defenders. So, but I still don't think there's anywhere close to enough to put him in there. He's played one game, he did very well.
Yeah.
Honestly, it probably should be Maguire. Like, and the reason I mentioned this is because he is better on the right. He doesn't always get to play it. He plays on the left. And I feel like having Gabriel there actually gives me a bit more confidence to like put Maguire next to him
because he's quick as well.
He's quick as well.
Exactly. I mean, if as you know, I don't rate Maguire at all, and I think this is. I
don't particularly rate him highly either. But this is like I think it's a shallow pool. I probably will take Maguire over Luis, to be honest.
Honestly, I would rather take Luis there, but I mean, let's leave that one then to the viewers.
Let's just leave that one. I don't think that's an outstanding.
It could literally be either.
It could be either. It could probably even be. Honestly, there are days in which Lindelof can look like a god among men, and most other days you can barely see him. You can breeze past. I can probably breeze past him.
Absolutely. Left back.
I think there's two standard options here, right? And kind of comes down to like what is the midfield that you play. Actually, I would argue Shaw or Tierney. I know I've said this many times. I really rate Shaw. I've said this a long time, and I believe like in terms of like if not for that injury that he had, he would be a pretty special left back right now. He's the closest I've seen to like a young Ashley Cole in terms of like the roundedness of his game. He's
now he's just round. That's the problem.
That is a bit of a problem.
I mean, exactly.
But he's defensively quite sound. So it depends really on like what's the midfield that we're going for, because I feel he's a great defensive left back. He's not going to offer too much in the offensive sense. So that's probably it's a bit of a question mark actually.
It's a question mark. not for me though. I think for me it's hands down. It's going to end up being Kieran Tierney, mainly because one, he has been good defensively as it is. I mean, apart from one game against Mahrez where he was left completely on his own, which that could literally happen to anyone. He's been absolutely
that was not
brilliant.
pretty, yeah.
Yeah, he's been
But to be
absolutely
fair, the same
brilliant.
thing happened with
Yeah,
Pepe and Shaw, right?
and Shaw,
So
exactly. Yeah,
it can happen. Like when there are days in which somebody
exactly.
just has your number. I remember, like, for some reason, Aaron Lennon, who's been rubbish every time I've seen him play, except when he comes up against Evra. He just had his
Yeah,
number and Evra was pretty sound defensively when he
yeah,
was at his peak. So yeah, it just comes out of the midfield for me, to be honest, right?
yeah.
I
But I
think
mean, the thing for me is that Tierney. The reason I would pick Tierney in this combined 11 is just
is it for the
purely
overlap,
that
I
crossing.
guess.
It's for the overlap and his crossing. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen a left back. I mean, Tellez is brilliant at it. Don't get me wrong, especially as a wing back, but he's not available in this because he hasn't played enough. I guess I don't think he's played a Premier League game yet. But yeah, Tierney's crossing is absolutely sensational, and he is good defensively, and he's quick. And I think as an all-round player, I mean, at least at this stage, I would definitely take him over Shaw. Possibly not the Shaw that came from Southampton, but definitely current Shaw, just because he offers something going forward as well. But yeah,
The interesting question that brings up is, if you're going to have Tierney, who's much more of like an attacking left back, right?
mm-hmm.
There's even a world in which you play a diamond, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't need to be a 4-3-3. Simply because I think there's honestly a surplus. There's probably like 3 midfielders from United who could get in.
You know
Actually,
what?
probably
Let's
4.
actually do that. Let's do this as a diamond. The other thing I was thinking of is, while we were discussing this, there is no real standout right winger. I mean, Pepe has not really lived up to it yet. You don't
The
have a
closest I
right
think
winger.
is there in that position is,
Willian, probably. If you had
yeah,
to
not
play a
even
right
Willian.
winger, it would probably end up being
I can actually
Willian.
see like you even playing. There's a world in which Saka becomes a right winger cutting in, right?
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah, for sure.
but I don't think there's a standout right winger. So we do away with that position altogether.
Yeah,
We play a diamond,
yeah.
and I think that way you can
You can
fit
actually
in.
fit a lot more players in.
You can fit a
Yeah,
lot more players in, right? And I think the 2 strikers kind of select themselves, right?
yeah.
I think
So we
it's
got Rashford and Oba.
um, yeah, I think it's Rashford and Alba. Greenwood's actually pretty close. Like, I will say that, right? Like, the guy, I really rate Greenwood. I think it's
Yeah,
hard not to rate him, but I think it's probably those 2, right?
yeah. It has to be those two, I think.
It has to be those 2. Greenwood's also probably I would actually argue he's the best option of the right. So if you're going to play a 4-3-3, then it would the 4-3-3 would likely.
Well, I mean, I would play, if you were playing a right winger, then I would still play Willian ahead of him, just because the problem with Greenwood is that he just will not track back.
Yeah, it's an
So
issue. Like, and that's
yeah,
the only times in which like AWB is being exposed, because he has
yeah,
2 people on him constantly. But yeah, I think probably so I think that the front 3 effectively select themselves, right? It's Bruno sitting just behind,
yep,
right?
yep.
And
Agreed.
Oba on one side and
Rashford on the other.
Rashford on the other.
Yeah, Hartler on
Partey
the
is
other.
one of the midfield 3, right? He's probably one
Yep.
of the 2 shuttlers.
Mm-hmm.
So really the question is about the other 2 folks there. I don't really rate Xhaka.
Yeah.
I just really don't rate him.
But then I mean, to be honest, I would agree. My choice would actually be Fred at the base. I've been banging on about this for years now, that I thought you should play him there. So I'd go Fred at the base. I'd go Partey probably on the left of that midfield, kind of the diamond, I guess. Right hand side is the interesting one. I would actually choose Donny van de Beek.
I would actually do the opposite. I would actually probably put Partey on the right and play Pogba on the left, which is the position he's always done. That's the
Yes,
position that he made his name in
yes,
Juventus. So
but
yeah,
he has not been very good this year. I mean, I'm going purely on the form of leading up to this game, and apart from the Champions League game that you've mentioned, he's been poor. He's been poor. I just do not see how he would be selected in this team. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he's not in your starting 11 tomorrow.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he's not there, but I don't think that's just a function of. I think it's also like a function of tactics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I still don't believe that Fred can sit. I'll be very honest. I think he just doesn't have. You still see the lack of positional discipline come through with Fred quite a few times. I think we've had this debate multiple times. But yeah, I would probably go for if we're gonna it would be Fred, Partey, Pogba. I I actually might make Partey sit in that. I think that actually would
That's
work really
possible.
well. Yeah, like Partey as a deepest lying midfielder, Pogba on the left, Fred on the right. Effectively, like it's exactly the same formation we kind of played against Leipzig, except you have like a significant upgrade at the base of
Yep.
midfield. So I think honestly, I think the team kind of writes itself now. It's like De Gea in goal. It's Van Bissaka, Maguire, question mark.
Yep.
Then Gabriel. Think Shaw versus Tierney. I'm actually really not fussed about that one. I
Yep.
think I do rate Tierney. I think he's got talent. He's definitely going to get caught out quite a few times. But yeah, and then I think it's Partey, Pogba, Fred, Fernandes, Alba, and Rashford. That's a pretty serious team.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. That's giving some sort of balance. If we could actually sort out the right side of central defense, that's a title winning team.
That is a title-winning team. I think obviously you know me, I actually think Martial is more talented than Rashford in my
I
eyes.
agree. I do
I,
agree.
I feel he has the highest ceiling actually of
But
any
we're going on
United
form,
player.
so
We're
what do you
going on
do?
farm, and yeah, exactly. He's not really been at his best this year, but I do think that he should be walking into a lineup such as this. But so that's one, two, three, four Arsenal players
Yep.
in
Yeah.
that. Do you think
Well,
that's a
well,
fair reflection of where the squads are at right now?
um, I think it probably just about is. And as we know, it's a function of the formation as well. Um, the thing with Xhaka as well, it's he's one of those frustrating guys. Like on his day, he is a bloody good player, and what he does give, which looking at that midfield, apart from Partey, there is a potential for slight flimsiness in there. And like one thing he does give is that little bit of rigidity. He's just not very quick. So on another day, if Arsenal were coming into this game in much better form than they are, I would probably make a case for that. But I'd say that's fair as things stand with this formation.
Yeah, this would be even harder if we had to kind of choose our all-time United Arsenal
Oh
11,
God, yeah,
right?
and that's
There's
for
again a few certs I
yeah,
think there. I think we've discussed this before. Like I think for me, Schmeichel in goal is kind of a cert.
yep, 100%.
Henry is a cert. Um, Vieira, I think, probably walks into the team as well. Ashley
Yep,
Cole will walk into the team.
Keane
Um,
walks into the team.
Keane actually walks in the team. I like and
Yep.
probably Scholes as well. I have a
Mm.
massive soft spot for Scholes. There's just so many options actually. That's just
Yeah,
like I think that really goes
I
into
think
the
once you get
realm of
there,
like
the last few
eh,
spots are quite difficult to pick,
yeah.
particularly if
I think
we
it's
went
really
classic four
only
four two.
yeah exactly. It's a classic 4-4-2 would be great, right? But
Yeah,
then no Scholes. I think it's Keane
yeah,
Vieira, probably Giggs on the left. You can't really argue with I think that. Um, I would say Henry, probably Henry and Rooney up top.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, it'll be incredible to leave Bergkamp out of that team as well.
but yeah, I know, but
It's
it's
amazing the names that will get left out of that team.
yeah, that would be a serious team. And again, even defense, like you can make so many arguments, right?
Yeah,
I think one school of thought would say you just don't break up a center back partnership like Ferdinand and
and
Vidic.
Vidic, yeah.
Yeah, and you can make an argument that Sol Campbell should be there. So I
I mean,
think
Tony
that's
Adams, you could say Adams
yeah,
and
Tony
Bold.
Adams as well, bit
Adams and Bold was a
further.
serious one. Yep,
So yeah, it's quite interesting. I think that's probably something for another day. But overall, I think pretty interesting game tomorrow.
yep.
Looking
So
forward to seeing how that goes.
final
Uh,
thoughts, prediction, chest out.
um, yeah, so I actually think it's likely going to be a 1-1. Um,
Yep.
so it's going to sound crazy, but I can either see it being a 1-1 or it's going to be like a 3 or 4-1 to us. But I think it's likely going to be a 1-1. I don't think yeah, I can end up with an egg over my face, but um, I actually think that draw is the likeliest outcome. It's draw or like
Yep.
a scrappy win to one of the two sides is the
Yeah.
likeliest outcome.
That's I was going to say I think 1-1 or potentially a 2-1 either way is what I see. I see both teams scoring. I definitely see you scoring because I don't know which minute you'll get it, but you'll get a penalty at some stage. Mike Dean, referee tomorrow.
Oh,
So
okay. Good memories of that guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
so penalty, 100% on the cards. Red card potentially on the cards. I think let's hope that it takes us back to one of those eras of genuinely fiery derbies as well. I mean, they've been really lacking.
Yeah, they've been lacking. I think the last few games, I think the last few years in general, I just don't think it's been the same rivalry.
Yeah,
But it's two great clubs of English football that I think
yeah,
really defined the early Premiership years. So it would be good to see. It's always good to see a strong Arsenal team and a strong United team. I think it's just good for the league. So on that note, would love to hear the thoughts of our listeners. It's ran way over than what we were hoping. So,
yeah.
but I still hope there's some pretty interesting discussion here. Would love to hear your thoughts on the combined team. Like, does that make sense? The 4-1-2-1-2 that we were talking about. Yeah. Any final thoughts on them?
No, I think you leave your teams in the comments below as well. We'll be really interested to see them. And yeah, have a good
Awesome.
have a good rest of the day.
Take care, folks. Bye bye.
Thanks, bye.